Hi, everybody. Dr. Nayo again here with Rupa Health University, offering another video to help understand some health issues. Today, we're going to be talking about mycotoxicity, otherwise known as mold toxicity. Before I get too far into this conversation with you all, I want to make sure that I kind of loosen up some of the fear that's around mold toxicity. I find oftentimes that there's a lot of fear about mold and it being in someone's body, and almost as if we don't have any control. And that, in my experience working with clients, has really just exacerbated the situation, the symptoms, and their experience with it. So I want to just start this off by making sure that we're laying the foundation that we all can be well, and to dispel some of the fear around mold by helping to understand how we diagnose it and then what can be done about it. The biggest thing you'll always hear me talk about with clients, though, is making sure we're addressing our thoughts and any fear around a different medical or other experience we're having. So I really want to offer that as we do speak about this so that we don't let things run away with fear. So what is this? So mycotoxicity is the whole concept that molds grow and they produce toxins known as mycotoxins and VOCs, which are volatile compounds. These can have some health consequences if they are absorbed through our mucous membranes, which largely is going to be through our skin, our respiratory tract, and our GI tract, because those are all lined with mucosal tissue, which is very easily absorbs different compounds. So that's the main route of entry for mycotoxins. The one thing that you'll hear a lot of functional medicine providers speak about is that these mycotoxins can persist because mold is able to colonize in our body, particularly in these locations, the gut, the sinuses, the lungs, etc. If there is an issue, that we're definitely addressing them. So at this point, when I'm recording this video, there are over 200 mycotoxins that we're aware of and are common, but there are many more that have not even been identified to date. The one thing that we need to understand, though, is you can't look at a mold and determine whether it's producing mycotoxins. So you really want to get an expert involved, which I'll touch on a little bit toward the end of this seminar, but you want to make sure that if you do notice mold, you want to have an expert actually deal with it and inspect and remediate if needed. A large source of mycotoxins indoors or water damaged buildings, known as WDBs, and mold is able to grow on a lot of different surfaces when there's moisture or humidity in the air, including paper, wood, furniture, etc. Exposure is pretty much what I've already alluded to. It's going to be through inhaling it into our respiratory system, ingesting it through our GI tract, and absorbing it through the skin. So why do molds make mycotoxins? So I was actually listening to something on this recently, and what is being offered that is potentially there's a battle going on between fungi and bacteria. And so in order for the fungi to have more virulence and be able to survive a little bit better, they create mycotoxins that have an antibiotic effect on bacteria. So it gives them a little bit of a survival or evolutionary advantage. They are secondary metabolites in response to oxidative stress. So if you've listened to any of my talks before, you've heard me say oxidative stress is when we're putting a lot of pressure on our system, generally coming from inflammation, and our body can't handle it over time, and it creates oxidative stress, which creates dysfunction in a lot of the different systems in the body. So these metabolites that are made by mold in response to oxidative stress can also give the mold a competitive advantage for their survival and promote changes in their life cycle that are going to support survival. So that's what's being offered so far in terms of why molds are making mycotoxins. So what are 5 more concerning molds that we know about? So there's cladosporium, which is found on painted walls, woods, and carpets. It's a very common mold. It's one of the more serious ones. It can have a green, brown, gray, or black color. There are 50 species that have been identified to date. And chronic cases of this mold can produce pulmonary issues, lung issues that could be fluid in the lungs and emphysema. Now, again, I want to dispel some of the fear. That's generally not what's happening, but we want to be aware so that we're addressing any concerns. But I want to kind of dispel a little bit of the fear that can be handled before it even evolves to that. Second, more concerning mold is penicillium. This grows indoors on damp surfaces. There are over 200 species that we know of penicillium today, and they exist both in air and soil. They can cause foods or anything else that is perishable to spoil. And when you see them, it's usually meaning that there's a lot of humidity or dampness in the air. So it's a sign of needing to work on humidifying the air. Colors range from blue to yellow and green and white. And with this one in particular, it's associated with nail fungus and asthma. Third, we have Fusarium. This is found at lower temperatures. It's often going to be found growing on water-damaged surfaces. It can cause mild allergic reactions or other respiratory conditions, including asthma, and it has an orange color generally. And then we have Aspergillus, which is generally an indoor mold, and it's one of the least serious of the concerning molds. And there are over 200 species that we know about of this one as well. Only 16 of those, though, to date are known to cause any illness in humans. So again, wanting to kind of diffuse and dispel some of the fear that's around mold. This mold can be anywhere from yellow to green. And then the last one that we put here is one of the more concerning molds is Stachybotrys. And this is one that's also more concerning. It's known as black mold. These species produce mycotoxins that if they're disturbed, so if you go and you don't know what you're doing and you try to take care of and get rid of the black mold, it can be have more consequences. It tends to grow on damp materials that contain cellulose. So that's going to be things made of paper, things or cellulose material. And they may be associated in younger infants as well as immunocompromised or elderly folks as having a little bit more of an issue. So those are our 5 more concerning molds. Then this is a list of the more common toxic molds that we're aware of. You can see a lot of them are Aspergillus species. We have Penicillium, Stachybotrys, Chiotonium, and Willemia. And then these are the mycotoxins that each of them produce. I'm not going to really speak a lot about these today, but this one is known to be found indoors on wooden products, can serve as allergens or cause fungal nail mycosis, fungal growth in the nails, or neurological infections. And then this one is found mostly growing in hay, straw, or greens, and it may cause bronchial asthma or respiratory hypersensitivity. Let's get into what are the specific mycotoxins. So we just went through what some of the more common molds are. These are actually some of the more common toxins that are produced by these molds that have been found. So this first one, aflatoxin, is found in indoor environments, mold that grows indoors. And it's basically found on maize or corn, peanuts, cottonseed, and tree nuts. And again, Aspergillus is a big player here, and it's found in more warm, humid environments. It needs that moisture. There is this one aflatoxin M1 that is a metabolite of aflatoxin B1, and this one can be found in milk products. So these are kind of some of the things that you're going to want to avoid, or not avoid, but be aware of if you suspect mold exposure. These are some of the things that your doctor may want to kind of have you avoid if you're found to have this aflatoxin. It's a potential carcinogen, so it is something that you want to address, but I don't want people to feel like, oh my gosh, if I have mold, that means it equals cancer. I just have run into a lot of fear with clients around mold, so you'll hear me say this a few times during this talk. There also can be some associated liver damage, liver cancer. It can also impact your lungs, kidneys, brain, and heart. But again, generally, if you're working with a good functional medicine doctor, they're working to eliminate the mold, even colonization, so that the mycotoxins are not an issue anymore. Then we have ochratoxin A. This is another one found in the more common molds, Aspergillus, Penicillium. This one is found also in agricultural crops, but worldwide. And again, we see cereal grains being a big one, dried fruits, dried vine wine, grapes, cheese, cocoa, and coffee. It's also often found in water-damaged buildings. And these are some of the potential effects. So it can be harmful to the kidneys. It can damage DNA. It can impact fetal development. And again, it's a carcinogen, potentially, if it's allowed to continue. So again, this should be dealt with when you're working with a functional medicine provider. It is a heat-stable mycotoxin, so this is important because a lot of times we think when we cook our food, we're going to eliminate certain things. This is one that may make it through the cooking process or any heating process. Okay, so we have our next one here, trichosanines. This is a group of toxins that can be found thriving in food products, also any contaminated livestock feed. And the other thing that we know about this potential toxin is that it can impact the development of the fetus, can be a cytotoxin, harmful for your immune system, DNA, and a carcinogen. This is our next one, gliotoxin. So this is also produced by an Aspergillus species. It can be found in contaminated food or with water damage. This is an important one for immunosuppressed folks because it can have an immunosuppressive effect that could actually make that a little bit more of a consequence for people who have immunosuppressive disease. So that's an important thing to know. It also can impact the host, which would mean the human who has the mycotoxin in them. It may potentially decrease their own ability for their immune system to defend if they were to have what's called invasive aspergillosis, which is when it becomes more the mold is actually thriving more in the different tissues and systems in the body. So it can impact the immune system's ability to be able to deal with that as well. So it's kind of an important one to be aware of. All right, so I split up the different signs and symptoms that one could experience from mycotoxicity by system. So allergy symptoms like upper respiratory sinus congestion, postnasal drip, things of that sort. Respiratory symptoms, which could be actually having cough, asthma, or wheezing. It could exacerbate any other underlying lung disease if that was present. Metabolically, it can both support weight gain or weight loss. The way that we think that it's impacting weight loss is that the mold actually tends to steal some of the nutrients, particularly minerals and things like that. So if a patient is really not absorbing via the gut because of the mold, they may lose weight because they're not absorbing well. Weight gain is interesting because despite what the person who has mycotoxicity and is gaining weight, changing their diet, exercise, this will not change the gaining of the weight because it's interrupting the metabolic systems in the body. It also can support dysglycemia or insulin resistance. That means the imbalance of blood sugar and insulin regulation. So you can see blood sugar issues become a little bit more prominent. From an immune or inflammatory standpoint, joint pain can be exacerbated. We can see autoimmune disease. We can see something called mast cell activation syndrome, which is a whole conversation in and of itself, but that can come along with mycotoxicity. Can also see more recurrent and chronic infections. Sometimes that's going to be in the sinuses or yeast infections, things of that sort. Neurologically, we can see fasciculations, which is changes in the muscles, neuropathy, paresthesia, which can be like a numbness or tingling or uncomfortable sensation in the nerves, down the nerve pathways, particularly in the extremities. Vertigo or lightheadedness can be seen. Brain fog, memory loss, autonomic dysfunction, which is when there's imbalance that sometimes is going to show up with people having issues maintaining blood pressure and things of that sort, as well as headaches. Skin is interesting because you can see a lot of different things. You can see just general irritation, hives, rashes, eczema, pruritus, which is itching of the skin. So then this here is a mast cell that's releasing histamine. So I just put that there because there can be some histamine intolerance. So from a genitourinary standpoint, you can have urinary urgency. So that means you have to hurry up and go to the bathroom. It feels like you can't wait. Incontinence or frequency can also be seen from a urinary standpoint. From a GI standpoint, we can see more food sensitivities. And we can see something called histamine intolerance, which is when either from the food or from what's going on in our system, there's an enzyme called a DAO enzyme that helps to break down histamine, and this can become dysregulated. So we can see more histamine intolerance, which can show up like more allergies, respiratory type symptoms, and a lot of other things. There can be a metallic taste noticed in a person's mouth, nausea, bloating after meals. IBS can be constipation and or diarrhea. Then dysbiosis. This is almost always going on when we have someone with some sort of mycotoxicity signs and symptoms. It's the imbalance of what's going on in the microbiome. So the bugs that are growing in the gut are out of balance. So this is probably to some extent already existing when somebody develops mycotoxicity and exposure to molds. This is probably already there, but may be exacerbated with that. Then from a psychiatric standpoint, folks can have more difficulty focusing. We can also say ED and ADHD, either seeing new onset or exacerbation of those symptoms. It can impact anxiety, depression, and OCD. We also, so this picture I have here is a mitochondria. This is very important because this is one of the backbones of, not one of, probably the most important thing in generating energy in our system on a cellular level. And this oftentimes can be impacted by mold as well. So we have a beautiful mitochondria here to just highlight that. So some of the things that we see with mitochondrial dysfunction, with mold exposure, mycotoxicity in particular, is fatigue. Some folks will develop chronic fatigue syndrome. And there's a longer list of mitochondrial things, some of which I've covered in other categories. So this is an important one that your functional medicine provider may actually focus on with you as they're supporting you on your healing journey. Then HPA axis, this is your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So this is the part of your system, your endocrine or hormone system, that's dealing with stress. So we can see this become more dysregulated with mold exposure and mycotoxicity. As a result, you can have more sweet cravings. You can also see more sleep disturbances. It can also lead to an exacerbation of anxiety, mood disturbance, etc. We can also see more hormone imbalance. And this, I actually listened to a really good lecture recently on this, where it's very interesting how the mycotoxins really can impair your systems, and particularly your hormone system's ability to make hormones. So that's something important that your providers will be looking at. Also, muscle loss as the result of either mitochondrial dysfunction or hormone imbalance. Also, lack of nutrients that you're able to absorb could also be another mechanism. And then things that you might see on your lab, your CBC, your complete blood count that would be normal sometimes with mycotoxicity, is anemia, or what we call leukopenia, which means a low white blood cell count. So next, how does a functional medicine provider work with you to figure out if mycotoxicity is an issue? So the first thing I would say is, if you suspect mold exposure because you've seen it in your home or work environment, it would be to be aware of that. Talk to your functional medicine provider about that. Then if you have some of those signs and symptoms, mention that, because oftentimes mycotoxicity is going to be a little bit down on our differential diagnosis. There's certain lower hanging fruits that we're going to address first, but this is one to think about. If you're addressing stress, you're addressing sleep, you're addressing hormone balance, gut health, all the big things that you know to work with a functional medicine doctor, and you're still not noticing that you're improving, then if your doctor has not already considered, you want to be thinking about looking for mycotoxins. So the one thing that I think a lot of us functional medicine providers are using the most is a urinary lab test for mycotoxins. There's a lab in particular that I use that's going to look at these mycotoxins in particular. These are some of the more common ones that actually can be addressed and are causing the issue. So what would one do when they're preparing to do their urine mycotoxin test? So it would be a morning collection generally. One of the things that I do with my clients is have them either take oral glutathione or do a glutathione IV several hours before. What this does is it helps to mobilize some of the mold so that we can actually pick it up, and not the mold, the mycotoxins, sorry. It pushes some of the mycotoxins out of the tissue, and so that is eliminated through the kidneys in the urinary tract and therefore in the urine. So that's one thing that can be done. Some people either are going to be very depleted in glutathione. Typically, I like to have my clients on glutathione for a while before administering it to try to prep to push some of the mycotoxins into the system to test. But if you don't have the time, you could still try it. The other thing is sometimes people can have genetic mutations called SNPs where they may not have the ability to utilize glutathione the way we want to. So that may be something that you'll see a functional medicine provider assess. But a lot of people, you can just give either oral glutathione or IV several hours before, and that will help us to get a better specimen and reading to get a true positive or negative test. Another thing that can be done is you could do an infrared sauna a few hours before. That's also going to help to mobilize some of it into so that it's actually picked up on the urine challenge. So that's how you would prep for it. Other things that your functional medicine doctor or provider may be thinking about addressing simultaneously is your adrenals. I always talk about this with my clients. It's very hard to heal the body when we're in a state of stress. So I mentioned at the start of this, really addressing and looking at any fears you have around any illness or whatever you're experiencing, and really kind of know that our systems, when supported in the right way, with the right thoughts, sleep, and all the things that a functional medicine provider is going to do with you, we do have the ability to heal. So kind of really work with that through journaling or whatever works for you to address that, because that will help to adjust how your body's dealing with stress, move you out of fight or flight into a more of a restorative healing mode. And that's very important. So one of the ways that a functional medicine doctor can assess this is by doing an adrenal stress index or test. And that looks at a cortisol curve where we're looking at your cortisol level morning, midday, mid-afternoon, early evening, before bed. And that really helps us to see, how are you responding to stress? Are you spending a lot of time in fight or flight? Or are you kind of more optimally balanced and not living in that? Because the more we can massage you into being in a restorative mode through meditation, mindfulness, etc., that is going to be very helpful in your system and being able to heal, because your body will take cues from that. Next, they may also, one thing I left out, so on that saliva test, they will also get a DHA level, which also tells us about stress. And this also may be done through a Dutch test, which is a urine test as well, which is also generally done when we're looking at hormones. You can also just do a serum DHA sulfate with your provider through a blood test, which is a very quick way to assess stress. It's not going to give us that 4-point cortisol curve to tell us as much, but it will be very helpful. Next, most functional medicine doctors are going to want to look at your thyroid, because this is one of the organs or glands that can be affected by stress in general, but mycotoxicity in general. So oftentimes they're going to address or assess your TSH, free T4, free T3, and I didn't put it here, but thyroid antibodies as well. And then a lot of times we're going to want to look at the sex hormones. So estradiol, progesterone, estrogen, and testosterone for women. And for men, testosterone and estradiol. This is important because, remember I said, these mycotoxins have an ability to impair some of the hormones and reproductive health, which can be important for fertility and some of the reproductive functions of these hormones. So it's an important one to assess and address. If your doctor suspects colonization, especially with more severe symptoms, they may do a Marcon's nasal culture to see if there's colonization intranasally. That can be helpful. A lot of times, additionally, remember I said that usually at baseline, when people are having really any disruptive health experience, generally, I don't want to overgeneralize, but generally the gut is out of balance. So we would want to look at a functional stool analysis, because it's very important, again, to push that into a state of health in order to just allow the system, the immune system, the metabolic system, etc., to get into a healing state to be able to support you as you clear the mycotoxins and mold. Sometimes your doctor may do some genetic testing. And then one of the things your provider is certainly going to want to be speaking to you about is recommendations for how do you deal with the mold that's potentially in your environment. So you have a little bit more control if it's in your home environment. So my general recommendation is to work with a functional medicine doctor to get a good recommendation for someone who's going to a company that does mold inspection. They generally are going to do something called an ERMI, an Environmental Relative Moldiness Index, which can give you an indication of, along with sampling for surface mycotoxins, it can give you an idea of what exactly is going on in your home. And then it's very important to be with someone who really knows what they're doing, so they know where to look for these things and how to inspect properly to make sure that they're uncovering anywhere that there could be hidden exposures. So this is really important to have someone do this, that your functional medicine doctor or provider is very confident, has been doing it often enough and getting reliable results, so that when you actually do go to remediate it, you actually know what you're dealing with. And I heard this, and I think that it's very wise from another lecturer. you want to have a different company do the home remediation. There's a conflict of interest if you have the same company inspecting and doing the remediation. Now, if you just feel good about it, that's up to you, but that's a good tip, I think. And generally, if you can, you want to be able to leave the environment for a period and let them actually do the remediation. So if there's somewhere else you can stay for an extended period of time, that's the best case scenario. It's not always possible, but that is the best case scenario. So what are sources of molds indoors? Because that's oftentimes, other than food stuffs and things of that sort, this is one of the bigger ways that we are impacted that we may not be aware. So anything that leaks, so a roof, pipes, fire sprinklers. So that's one of the things when you're working with a good inspector, they'll be able to look for sources that are actually causing the mold so you can cut them off at the source. Anything that's causing high humidity, so humidifiers, steam heat can support that. So if you see a lot of moisture building up on your windows, you want to kind of think about reversing that, because that's a sign that too much humidity is building up in your indoor environment. Another thing that can be a source of excess moisture that's leading to it is if the venting from like your dryer and everything is going into the garage, which is kind of staying indoors, versus venting it outside. That could be another source. So how do you prevent mold indoors? So you want to make sure you're repairing all leaks expeditiously, avoid anything that's going to create excess humidity. So that could be like steam heat, as I mentioned, or humidifiers. You want to vent outside. You want to remove any standing water. Crawl spaces, they're not doing them so much in newer homes, but this can be an issue. Standing water accumulating in crawl spaces that people are not aware of. You want to make sure that all furnishings and carpets or anything that's been water saturated or water damaged, you want to make sure that is dealt with. And then if you get your carpets or furniture cleaned, you want to make sure that they're allowed to dry completely so that that's also not a source. All right, so treating mycotoxicity. So a lot of this is going to sound familiar. It's going to be a lot of the functional medicine approach you hear from folks over and over and over again. So as I mentioned, if you can leave the affected area and remediate it while that's happening, that's best case scenario. If you can't, then, do your best to kind of avoid the areas that are exposed. So the next thing would be then to work with a good functional medicine provider who has experience dealing with mold exposure and mycotoxicity. And I just want to reassure you, this can get better. So when you start to read online and see all this scary stuff, just kind of really sit with the fact, address the fear, but know that you can get better. This is very essential, in my experience, to people really clearing anything that's more disturbing in your system. Next, you want to eat a clean anti-inflammatory diet. This does need to be free of any sugar, alcohol, or dried fruits, because that actually can feed the mold. Oftentimes, depending on what your provider is saying, they may have you avoid high histamine foods because that may exacerbate some of the allergic symptoms, respiratory symptoms. And then they're probably going to add a lot of foods that support detoxification. So things like cruciferous vegetables, turmeric, garlic, things of that sort, to make sure that you're opening up and supporting your detox pathways. And this is generally something that you've also probably seen if you've been working with a functional medicine provider. They're typically, as a part of dealing with a mycotoxin, a toxicity, and mold exposure, they're going to work with you through a 5R program. I structure my R's a little bit differently. I put rebalance first. It's so important, as I've said many times throughout this talk, to address stress so that the body can move into a healing state. So that would be the first thing that I would have folks start to really lean into. So mindfulness, meditation, and then make sure you're sleeping optimally, which is getting to bed by 10 and getting at least 8 hours of sleep. You may need some help, and that may not happen immediately, which is okay, but just allow that to be a goal. Second, we want to remove all inflammatory foods, processed foods. So they may put you, as I said, on some sort of elimination detox diet. They may also do a yeast or anti-candida diet, which is very similar to just an anti-yeast diet in general. And then depending on what they're seeing, they may also do a low histamine diet. So that's really important, because that can quickly help to reduce the symptoms when you start pulling out things that are exacerbating those symptoms. You will be able to add those foods back in as you heal the gut, clear the mycotoxins. So it's not a long-term thing that you're going to have to be off the foods that are associated with histamine. Then likely after they get a functional stool analysis, they're going to look at what needs to be replaced, any missing digestive enzymes or supporting nutrients that could be really important. For mold exposure in particular, replacing minerals and B vitamins and different things that can be being utilized by the yeast, that becomes really important because a lot of the minerals and B vitamins are essential for a lot of the metabolic and different mitochondrial pathways in order to get your system back to an optimal level. So that's going to be an important step that your functional medicine provider will work with you on. The next step would be to re-inoculate. So make sure that you're supporting building up your microbiome so it's got lots of healthy microbes that support your immune system. The more and more you pull these less favorable microbes down and increase the healthy ones, these can oftentimes take care of these just by increasing the healthy microbiota. Now, sometimes we actually have to treat things if we see specific things or specific levels, but it's really important to work with your doctor on that because that is very important for healing the immune system, which is needed to clear mycotoxins. Last, we would have you work on a repair program with your provider. They may pull in a functional medicine nutritionist at this point where you're repairing the gut mucosa. Remember, the gut lining is mucosal tissue, and this is one of the tissues or surfaces that can be affected by mold and mycotoxins. So by repairing that tissue, that's very helpful step in getting you healthy again. So they may add some of these nutrients and foods to help heal the gut. The next thing that we want to be thinking about in treating mycotoxicity is supporting the mitochondria. If you remember when I went through the signs and symptoms of what can be out of balance, I said the mitochondria are very important. So your functional medicine doctor likely is going to consider some sort of mitochondrial support supplement. This may be kind of later down the road, and it may not be necessary of just when they work on other things, you're getting better. But this can be an important step in the healing process, in particular healing cell membranes with a particular supplement called phosphatidylcholine. Optimizing the hormones can be really important. So remember I said there can be dysregulation with your sex hormones, thyroid hormones, and adrenals. So this may be an important step in helping you to start to have more energy, feel better. So that is an important thing to actually address if they're out of balance. Additionally, specifically for the mycotoxins, every provider is a little bit different. So there's no one kind of protocol that any provider is going to utilize. So I put several things that different providers are likely to utilize. So oftentimes they'll use either a combination of antifungal herbs or medicines, or they'll just use one or the other. I tend to use antifungal herbs as much as possible and then add the antifungal medicines in if needed. This is also very specific to the mycotoxins that are isolated. So different herbs have different activity against different mycotoxins, and then same with the meds. So that's a very targeted approach that your provider will be taking for you. And then oftentimes we'll add binders. So once we're treating the mycotoxins and trying to kill them, we want to bind them up. And so a lot of times we're going to bind with these different nutrients and clays and charcoals, and fiber is a big one that you can just utilize by increasing it in your diet. So this is an important step that a lot of providers will utilize. The important thing to remember is you want to take this away from anything that you want to be absorbed through the gut. So your food, your nutrients, supplements, medications. But this can be an important step. This is not a long-term step, though, so you shouldn't look up and be on binders for a year because we don't want to do it so long that we're depleting these things. Other things that typically can be done to augment the healing effect is to support the liver and kidney detoxification pathways. So for the liver in particular, glutathione, either by IV or orally, very helpful. NAC is interesting because it's not just going to help you produce more glutathione, but it's actually a binder itself. So it's kind of playing double duty. So that's an important one we consider. This also can be used intranasally if we suspect colonization or actually find it on a test. And then A is alpha lipoic acid. That's another one that can be very supportive and helpful. And then potentially adding a blend of detox herbs, which may include things like dandelion and milk thistle. then most likely they're going to add back key minerals and nutrients like magnesium, selenium, zinc, and more, because Maria said the mold can be stealing them. So sometimes you can see issues with people's nails, their hair, their teeth, things like that, as a result of them not getting key minerals. Same thing, the B vitamins oftentimes have to be repleted maybe above what someone may normally need baseline. And then nutrients in general may need to be repleted even more than normal. We may also add something like quercetin and nettles, generally in a combination supplement formula. This can calm down a histamine response that's going on with mycotoxicity. Sometimes if there's an actual histamine issue, we may add DAO enzymes, which help to break histamine down, and you take that before your meal. That can be helpful. If you had mast cell activation syndrome, there's a whole other avenue that we would go down to add more things to support that. And then we want to address the gut and microbiome. This is very important. I said that on the last slide, but I wanted to put here in particular, certain probiotics can be actually helpful in eliminating mold, including Lactobacillus plantarum, Acidophilus, and also Bifidobacterium are a few that come top of mind. There are a lot of herbs that can be utilized intranasally. NAC, I mentioned, can be utilized intranasally. They all also have citrus intranasal sprays that can be very useful for treating colonization in the nasal passages and sinuses. Another really important thing when you're addressing mold, because it can colonize, are to at some point use biofilm disruptors. So this is generally a blend that you would get, your functional medicine provider would recommend, that helps to break down biofilms, which are just films where different organisms, in particular here mold, can be hiding. So it's harder to break them up and eliminate them. So a biofilm disruptor can be utilized for a certain period of time to help break that up, to decrease the burden on your system and eliminate the mold and help to get the mycotoxins down. Vitamin C is very important to add because this is important for your immune system and antioxidant support. Curcumin, also important for the same reason, as well as it helps to support via detoxification via the liver. So that's another important one your provider may add. And then omega-3 fats. Fats in general are really important when we're thinking about dealing with mycotoxicity, because you need important fats to help with cell membrane health. And omega-3s additionally also have a really potent anti-inflammatory effect. So next, what can you do just purely on a self-care level to help eliminate the mycotoxins? This does not replace everything I just said. This is what you could do to augment and expedite the healing process. I mentioned at the top, address any fearful thoughts around this experience, reduce stress, optimize and prioritize sleep. The reason I say that, and I kind of alluded to it, but sleep is when a lot of the healing or restorative processes in the body occur. So whether it's on a detox level, a mitochondrial level, a metabolic level, immune system level, a lot of that is happening at night. So when you prioritize sleep and you're getting it earlier in the evening by around 10 o'clock, you're supporting yourself getting in those modes a little bit better. So that's why this is so important in any healing process. And then Epsom salt baths is really important because, one, they have magnesium, which is often depleted with mold toxicity, but also it can really help to release and pull out some of the toxins, one, just by sweating. That can be a really helpful process, and doing it a couple times a week can be really helpful. The one thing that I would note is if you're going to do a lot of those Epsom salt baths or infrared saunas, you might want to think about asking your provider about stocking a binder along with that. So if you're mobilizing the mold and mycotoxins, that you're actually binding them as you're liberating them. And that can be helpful as well. Then consider having HEPA filters and dehumidifiers in place. And then this is something, I got this from the medical mediums protocol. Juicing herbs and roots can be really helpful. So I've used this in patients in conjunction with herbs, herb tinctures and supplements. For some clients who just can't even tolerate doing some of the herbal regimens, just juicing can be really, really helpful. And so he has a whole protocol you can look at in his book, The Brain Savers protocol, and it's called the Rain Shot Therapy for Mold Exposure. And it has basil, oregano, rosemary, ginger, radishes, and fennel. And all of these have activity, fungal activity, that are really helpful for helping to clear the mold. The last thing I just want to add and make sure that everyone's really clear on is just, it's very important to know that you can be well. So whenever you're in your experience, especially if you've been healthy or it seemed that you've been healthy up into this point where you have this experience, it may feel like you've thrown your body out of balance and it'll never get there again. But just know that you can be well. So that's it for our talk today on mold exposure and mycotoxicity and some of the consequences and how you can work to reverse some of those things going on in your system. So I hope this helps and have a great day.
Welcome to Rupa Health, the best place to order, manage, and track results from over 30 different lab companies in one single place for free. It's going to take you under 2 minutes to sign up, and you can order any functional medicine lab for your client in under 30 seconds. Let me show you how it's done. So here's our beautiful interface. I'm typing in the name of my client, selecting the lab that I want to order for them, and hitting send. From there, Rupa and their amazing team handle the rest. They email the client, collect payment, and even offer an interest-free 3-month payment plan. We've also built the world's largest library of information about chronic health conditions, the lab tests that can help you find the root cause, and the evidence-based interventions that you can use to help people heal from them. It's called the Rupa Health Magazine. There, we have in-depth articles about almost any health condition you can imagine. And we give you step-by-step protocols that other clinicians have used to help their clients heal and that are verified by evidence-based sources. You should totally check it out, and it'll transform your practice. And we can't wait to see you. So make sure you sign up today at rupahealth.com.